Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we have some really dark stories for you today. Really good ones. I'm exceptionally happy with this video, as you can tell by my good mood. So, prepare yourselves for some truly disturbing stories. Forewarning, a few of these are going to be trigger warning-y, so you're being warned now. If you're easily susceptible to being super disturbed by very dark topics, I suggest you click off now. But with that being said, let's jump in, grab your textbooks, and let the darkness take control. I used to work for my dad, who was partially self-employed doing regular maintenance and floor refinishing for a childcare program called Head Start. The one center was in an old school which was built not long after the turn of the century and served as a church functions building in addition to housing Head Start and another childcare. We always did floors over the summer. Anyone who's stripped and waxed floors knows that when you're putting the coating back on, it's quiet and relaxing. We were the only people in the building since it was midsummer weekend, and yet it felt off, even before you entered, like something was watching you from the second floor windows. So here we are, slowly progressing across this huge room, when we hear a thunk upstairs and then stop. Then it sounded like someone was skipping across the room and back, and then it stopped again. So we finished the layer and went upstairs. Mind you, the upstairs was a few classrooms with shelves, blocking direct movement from one end to the other, filled with supplies from the other classes. No one was up there, so we closed the doors and went downstairs to start the other room. Once again, this sound started, but this time I sprinted upstairs. The sound stopped before I reached the hall, but all the doors were open at various angles. We didn't hear the sound anymore that summer, but my dad asked the childcare advisor from the other end of the building if they heard any weird noises. She said no, but that one day they were sitting down for snacks and a few kids were staring in a corner. The aide asked them what they were looking at, and one of the kids asked, "Why can't the girl eat with us?" The aide looked around and asked, "What girl?" And the kid pointed to the corner and said, "The little girl with the white dress." I literally haven't set foot in the building since, and I have no desire to do so. I used to think ghosts were for scary stories, but I have trouble believing this isn't real. I went to a Catholic school, and we had a school chaplain who was essentially some sort of friend to the kids. It sounds really creepy when you say it like that, but the dude was goddamn amazing. He talked multiple students out of suicide, helped tons of kids come to terms with and overcome bullying, harassment, and sexual/domestic abuse, as well as encouraging every single student to reach for their dreams. Anyway, he once went the extra mile for a very troubled family at my school. The two kids in question were adopted brothers, and both incredibly unstable. The brothers would be your best friend one second and then suddenly fly off the handle the next, making you literally fear for your own life. Anyway, knowing their family problems, the school chaplain volunteered to become the two boys' godfathers in order to legally be able to help them and their family out financially. About a year after I finished school, the school chaplain appeared in the local newspapers. He had been arrested for imprisoning and raping the older of the two lads. For most people, that was enough to condemn him, but most of the people I went to school with found the whole thing somewhat suspicious. Whenever someone encountered one of the two boys, they would instantly launch into a step-by-step recount of exactly what happened, as if desperate to convince everyone they knew that they were telling the truth. The only thing wrong was that these step-by-step accounts were usually vastly different each time they were told, as if poorly thought out. Regardless, the chaplain imprisoned and eventually died of cancer while still inside. It was only after his death that it finally came out that the rape never happened. The chaplain had run into financial trouble himself, and so was unable to keep giving the boy's family money. As punishment, the whole family, yes, the parents were the ones who came up with the idea, invented the story of rape to teach him a lesson. The guy was a hero. He even helped my girlfriend at the time get through her parents' divorce in one piece. And yet, his lot in life wound up with him sad, forgotten, name besmirched, and alone, to die of cancer in prison. This happened to me in the summer of 2009. I was at a 6-week Air Cadet band camp, and basically, it was the most messed up 6 weeks of my life. Second night there, we're lying in our bed in the barracks. There's 8 of us to a room, and we're awake, and just about midnight talking about girls and texting. One guy called Alex is the only one sleeping and is lying on the bottom bunk next to the door. Suddenly he moans and's like, "Guys, why am I drinking?" We all burst out laughing, but then he flipped on the light, and he was covered in blood. So we call the sergeant to change his sheets and shirt, and they flip off the light while he's cleaning himself in the bathroom. We lay there, staring up, waiting for Alex's return. When he does, he flips on the lights, then he turns them off again once he's in bed. This time we notice there's a weird glow on the ceiling. The dude on Alex's top bunk, called Brad, starts freaking out and jumps off his bed. Naturally, we all jump off our beds too, to see what he's tripping about. On the ceiling in glow-in-the-dark letters are the words, "Die, Adam," and it looks like it has blood spattered around it. By the way, Adam was the name of a kid who supposedly committed suicide years ago in that very same barrack block. Bear in mind those letters were definitely not there before he returned from his nosebleed cleanup. We freaked out and yelled for the sergeants and basically didn't sleep that night. That's just the beginning. Fast forward a few weeks and a bunch of us, Alex and Brad included, are chilling in a room. Enter Sergeant Williams looking very pissed off. He mentions that a friend of his recently got shot in a gang-related something or other. His reaction is to sit down cross-legged and start chanting in some language. One kid, called Simon, says, "You're gonna burn yourself out." Sergeant Williams says, "No, I have more than you think." Now the rest of us don't have any idea what the hell's going on, so we start laughing, while he does this weird snapping then patting the ground thing. Angry, he tells us he's chanting in Gaelic, and that he can manipulate energy with his mind. We're all like 17, 14-year-olds, so we burst out laughing. He beckons me over and tells me to put out my hand, and I oblige, and he hovers his hand over mine, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And then my hand turns really hot, and I retract it quickly. I'm scared, so I just leave the room. A few minutes later, Sergeant Williams tracks each of us down and tells us that if we tell anyone, he will, no joke, end us. I nod and keep silent. I'm easily bullied. But Alex and one of his friends go straight to the sergeants. I wasn't there, but from what Alex told me, I gathered that Alex and his friend were put into lockdown while the police came and took a struggling Sergeant Williams away. We heard rumors that he was temporarily moved to an asylum. One more weird thing happened. We were about 4 weeks into the camp. It was Saturday and it was windy as hell. They wouldn't let us out of our barracks because apparently there was a tornado warning and they had put us on standby and that we may be moving to the basement. So we all sat in the halls polishing our boots and singing Amazing Grace while the power went out. It was like a movie because there was lightning and stuff and people were hysterical. Suddenly, some idiot at the window starts freaking out and a bunch of us run over to see what's outside. Now I didn't get to see it, but people say they saw a very Sergeant Williams looking like figure standing in the middle of the field behind our barracks staring at us. Some serious horror movie kind of stuff. It was awesome and horrifying at the same time. Craziest 6 weeks ever. These extremely disturbing events happened at my high school in the 1980s, some 7 or 8 years prior to when I went. My brother's high school principal arranged for an English teacher to murder another English teacher and her kids. The teacher was murdered. The kids were never found. The principal went to prison. He's out now. And the murdering teacher died in prison. It's unclear why it really happened, but there are rumors of a love triangle and insurance payouts. Her children were never found, but there was a rumor of them being burned in the school incinerators, which were quite large. Principal Smith was released because of misconduct by the prosecutor/police, but he died shortly after being released. And it goes to follow that the same school produced a murderer who raped and killed a mum and her infant daughter. I knew this kid really well, and was honestly not surprised when it happened. His name, Caleb Fairley. A guy killed himself in one of the girls' bathrooms about 9 years ago. A friend and I were the first to realize that the guy was dead, and not just sleeping on the job or something. He apparently committed suicide by overdosing on heroin, and was found with several syringes and empty tubes when they went to inspect everything. We, being the 15-year-old girls that we were, freaked out about seeing a dead body propped up against a toilet. It was all really surreal that a man would choose to do it on school grounds inside the girls' room. I think he was identified as one of the security guards who patrolled the freshman area. My friend and I passed by the man several times before we suspected anything was up. The moment I got a closer look and noticed his hands and face were really pale and almost blue. I then let out a small scream because holy hell, a dead person in a high school girl's bathroom. I think he sat there dead for maybe an hour, maybe more, before anyone, myself included, decided to do something. I didn't want to try and wake him up just in case he was in a bad mood, or he didn't want anyone to know he was in there. The 5 minutes we get as a break between classes was when my friend and I decided to let our teachers and other security guards know what was happening. And the way our school bathrooms are set up, the store's located in a separate station away from where the sinks are, so nobody worries about anyone being able to see them do their business. In the whole area where the sinks are, there's a bench along the back wall facing the mirrors. Occasionally, we see one of the security guards, male or female, just sitting at the bench and get some rest during breaks, which is understandable because the bathroom my friend and I often use, and the one where we found the dead guy, is almost always empty and quiet. Everyone's pretty cool with the security guards and no one really cares. The day my friend and I walked in and noticed someone quiet in one of the stalls, we just thought it was one of our regular security guards who decided to sit in the dark for a change. Guess we were wrong. When I was in Boy Scouts, my troop would always go to a camp called Camp Taquitz for our yearly summer camp. That specific year, they had an abnormal bear activity in and around the camp. It was a pretty sizable camp, but it was still way out in the boonies, so an encounter with a chipmunk was just as common as it would be with a California black bear. Wildlife management was done by some crazy old gunnery sergeant that we called Gunny, so you can see the situations you might find yourself in. I was tenting with a friend who had just joined the troop called James. He and I were sleeping in our tent in the middle of the night, must have been around 1 or 2 in the morning, when I was abruptly awoken by something. Everything is dead silent, aside from a plasticky creaking sound. Then I see it right above my head. Something was pushing the tent in so hard that it began to cave in right above, like something was leaning on it with all of their weight, except these tents were relatively strong. I mean, I could as a preteen jump on them and you'd just bounce right off. So being the scared little 13-year-old I was, I began to smack whatever it was with all my might, while simultaneously clubbing James with my fist to get him to wake up. Mind you, James is an incredibly deep sleeper, so this effect does nothing. Whoever or whatever it is was leaning so hard that it was almost touching my head. When James woke up from the nightmare he was having, he let out a blood-curdling, 10-year-old girl being murdered in the woods type scream. Whatever it was stopped leaning on the tent and vanished silently into the night. So for a few years, James, who had no recollection of the event whatsoever, and I always assumed it was a bear after the meds in my day pack. But after staffing at the camp and getting to know the law of the grounds a little better, I think something else may have been afoot. There have been many strange happenings around the camp, both paranormal and just normally unexplained. There's the usual Bigfoot and ghost stories, but older scouts and even administrative higher-ups claim to have seen things, claims of Wendigo, Skinwalker, hybrid things, some dead guy called Drag Thump, and a bunch of Native American myths. And the fact that there are no tears in the tent flap from the bear claws. We were the furthest away from the bear box. The fact that there was absolutely no sound from the supposed bear, as black bears make a hell of a lot of ruckus, and the fact that it was just persistently leaning on the tent instead of clawing at it like most bears tend to do, made me believe it was no Yogi or Smokey. It did not behave like bears do, and even if it was some older scout attempting to play a joke on us, they wouldn't have been heavy enough to lean that far into the tent, and probably would have erupted into laughter right after. Plus, my troop isn't like that. It's full of a bunch of mild-mannered city boys, perfect Eagle Scout material. Everything just seemed off. I was a camp counselor in a remote area. Former campers and counselors had always told me that the camp was haunted, but I didn't really believe in that nonsense. Anyway, it was the last night of the session, and I had a cabin of 9 to 10-year-olds. I woke up in the middle of the night to one of the kids sitting in my bed. I was a little groggy, but I remember him getting up and walking outside, and I was like, crap, I've got to go after him and get him back in the cabin. I remember the door opened noiselessly, and that was the last I saw of him. As soon as this happened, I woke my co-counselor and told him that a kid left the cabin and that I was going to go after him. I opened the door and it squeaked like hell, and then I tripped over a bunch of suitcases that were at the stoop. It was the last day of the session, and we always put the kids' suitcases out there so they would get picked up early in the morning and loaded onto the bus home. I searched all around the cabin and in the surrounding area for about 5 minutes. I then heard my co-counselor calling me in a hoarse whisper, so I ran back to the cabin. I just counted all the kids. They're all here. I still don't know what I saw that night. Was it a ghost kid? On my bed? My school was old. It was built at the time when the coup d'etat was very common in my country. For those of you who don't know, that is when the army overthrows a democratic government and seizes power, sometimes violently. So violent, in fact, that some coups had armed fighting in it, in the streets or air raids. This is why, when my school was built, they decided to add a bomb shelter in the basement for safety reasons. Time went by, and thankfully the shelter was never necessary for its original purpose, so the school started to store old furniture and various other things down there, and it was sort of used like a huge basement. Try to imagine a basement the size of a tennis court. But enough background. I started school in the mid-90s, and since the first time I saw the basement gate, it gave me the creeps. It was at the very end of a long hallway, and since it was only composed of iron bars, you could see half the stairs then the landing, and nothing more. Imagine a prison cell, but instead of a cell, there's a stairway. That's how it looked. It was creepy, but nobody thought much of it, since it was in a secluded part of the building, and it was always closed with a huge lock. One day when I was around 6 or 7, I was at recess when I heard a commotion coming from the basement hallway. When I got there was a big crowd of kids standing and pushing in front of the gate, trying to get in. The gate was open. From time to time, one of the kids would get out of the basement, make his way through the other kids, and run away in terror. Try to picture the scene. There was something down in the basement, and everyone was pushing their way inside because they wanted to see it. But when they finally did see it, they fled in horror. I stood there for a while watching the chaos until I spotted one of my classmates coming out the basement running. I chased after him and finally caught up to him and asked him what was going on. To this day, I don't truly believe him. He said inside the basement, moving around trying to hide behind the old furniture and boxes, was a dwarf. He said it was smaller than a kid, had a long, dark beard, and bark-like grey skin, long ears, thin, long hair, and ragged clothes. Of course, I had to see this myself, but by the time I came back to the basement gate, it was already closed, and the teachers were trying to calm the kids down. There was a lot of commotion in the school during the next few days about the whole issue. Many parents complained about it, and the school authorities tried to play it down, saying it was just another kid trying to play a prank, whereas others weren't so sure. They said that this thing walked, and the sound couldn't have been made by another kid. There was even a girl that said it tried to grab her by the ankle and take her deeper into the basement. After that, the gate was covered by a wooden board so you couldn't see the stairs anymore. Sometimes I think about the incident, because I would really like to know what actually happened that day. Was it really a kid in a costume trying to scare the school? Was it a homeless man that wandered into the basement and was using it as a shelter? Or was it just a case of mass hysteria? Or could it be possible that something far stranger happened that day and we don't have an explanation for it? This story happened to me when I was 11, attending a Christian summer camp. It was night time, and one of the counselors decided it would be the perfect time to play capture the flag. I was set up as the goalie. I did manage to tag out some of the other teams as they were attempting to steal our flag. After a while though, no one was showing up to steal my team's flag, and I was starting to get bored. I started pacing around the goal, keeping a close eye on it, and that's when I saw something. It didn't move like an animal, and didn't seem to have a solid form. I can tell you that it was grey, and like smoke had come to life and formed eyes, arms, and legs. The thing stood taller than my camp counselor, who was a dude standing at 6'1". Needless to say, my 11-year-old brain said this thing would eat me, and I ran to my counselor, actually bawling my eyes out. We lost the game because of this, and the counselor did report it to the site manager the next day. Now, some people have said that it was everything from an owl to a bear to a raccoon and even a bobcat. I've actually worked with owls since then, so I know it wasn't that. I grew up around raccoons, and bears don't move like this thing was moving. Bobcats, well, it was way too tall to be one. I have in fact educated myself on all sorts of animals since, just because of this experience, even debunked a whole load of paranormal activity just from doing this kind of research. And yet, I've never come across anything that would debunk what I saw that night. I went to boarding school, so there are a number of creepy things I heard about at the school. Normally it's stuff like kids would play Ouija board at the school and would get a phone call from the leader of a local Wiccan community to stop, but sometimes it was a lot stranger. First off, the junior and senior boys' dorm is called the upper school, and in the early part of the 20th century, a student decided to take their own life in the room there. Since then, the dorm has definitely been haunted. There's actually a challenge to stay in the upper school alone for a whole night, in the room where he took his life. In any case, a number of strange things have happened. I know a number of people who've lived in that room who've said they've woken up in the middle of the night, usually at 3 a.m., completely conscious but unable to move. They've all described it as if someone were laying on top of you. Many of you might say sleep paralysis, and who knows, it might just be that. There's only one person I know of, though, who's attempted to stay in the upper school alone. She went to bed as normal until suddenly waking up at 3 a.m. to hear a door open and close, and the pitter-patter of footsteps down the hall. Thinking someone was playing a prank on her, she opened the door and looked out into the hall. Of course, no one was there, so she went back to sleep. Later, she again woke, with the distinct feeling that someone was watching her. She heard the door open and the footsteps in the hall. This time, she went out into the hall. When she got outside the room, the door slammed shut behind her, and absolutely terrified, she booked it out. When her and a faculty member went back the next day, they couldn't open the door because all the furniture had been pushed against the door. I was a teenager and at a weekend camp. We were playing a flashlight tag game and I was running and hiding rather than seeking. I had been sneaking around a lot and bailing into the bush if younger kids came near. It made it more fun if the leaders moved, so the kids had more of a chance. This one time, I was just about caught by a group and jumped into an area of brush. As soon as I landed, I heard someone else shift and heard their breathing. I whispered, "Sorry, I didn't know you were here." They didn't answer. I waited for them for almost a minute in silence, aside from hearing the breathing, while the kids went a different way. I said to them, "We can probably head off now," and started to go. The other person also left, rustling through the brush on the other way without saying a word. So while I don't know what I was hunkered down with, it was bigger than a raccoon and smaller than a fully grown bear. Maybe a baby bear or coyote. No idea, but it was definitely kind of freaky. I sat next to a great guy in one of my classes in high school, Alexander, who was some kind of inter-district transfer after the year started. We had a ton in common and got on eerily well. Our last conversation was a debate on who or what Mr. Beam really is. I'm in the "he's an alien" camp, and Alexander was convinced he was an angel. We went back and forth on the pros and cons for both. What makes an alien, what makes an angel, and what would make them both behave like that? We couldn't really dissuade each other nor convince each other either way. It was one of the most intelligent debates about a frivolous topic I've ever had. It was fun. I was smitten, and looked forward to seeing him again the next day. He absolutely disappeared. He wasn't there the next day. His seat was empty for the next few days, and I asked my teacher if they knew anything or if he was okay. They didn't know who I was talking about. They had a look at their past roll sheets to find his name and noticed that he wasn't on for the last few days' sheets. They would not give me his last name because he was a recent transfer and he wasn't in the school directory. I went to the office out of concern, and all of this was far too weird. Again, they looked him up. Could barely find him. Would not give me his last name or any information. I asked them to pass on my number and name, and they had no address or phone number to be able to do that. It's like he never existed, except as a name on 1 or 2 pieces of paper. I'm sure there's a perfectly normal explanation, but it's so strange, and with the subject of our last debate in my mind, I always have this weird feeling that there was more to it. But that's impossible, right? My former comprehensive school has seen its fair share of paranormal activity. Caretakers, teachers, and students can tell you a ghost story about it, and you know for certain they're not lying. Enter my English teacher. He was my teacher for the first 3 months of Year 7, before he went to Romania. He had a really long name, we just called him Ryan. He was a funny guy, and before he left in December of 2015, he shared with us a really creepy story. Having been built on a graveyard, the school's caretakers have certainly seen some rather supernatural occurrences. Once the night has the area blanketed in darkness, and it definitely takes control here. On this occasion, the caretakers had to go into the basement, I can't remember exactly what for, when they came across a horrific sight. All that I do know is that there was a photo involving some mangled-like feet. My teacher was going to jump scare the class one day by doing a "rah" sound effect while showing the picture, and since it was only the good students in the class, I was the only person who got the jump scare warning. I'm not sure if he knew I was into Five Nights at Freddy's at the time as well as creepypastas and stuff, but anyway. So chaos ensued after the jump scare, and to quote Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow, they scream and they cry. Now, I need to mention that my old school opened in 1966 during the Cold War era. The graveyard nearby dates back to the mid-19th century, around 1861, so there is an 105-year gap. According to my science teacher in Year 8, given how poor the town where the comprehensive school was back then and now, the majority of the graves were made of sandstone, so you can imagine how many graves have been built over, and perhaps the restless souls those graves belong to. And then there's the story that Courtney shared with me. One of the school's bathrooms, the actual clean one near the assembly hall, is allegedly the place with the highest rates of paranormal activity in the school. I'd never had any issues in there. Perhaps if they were true, spirits took pity on me, as all the other toilets had been vandalized by the lowest of the low, thus leaving me alone to do the necessary business and wash my hands. But I was never in there for more than 5 minutes, so I guess that's another reason why perhaps I never experienced anything in there. But Courtney's story goes that she and a few other girls were getting changed in the bathroom for drama. I don't recall all the details, but what I do recall is that they were the only ones in the bathroom when something happened to make their costumes, or at least this girl's, called Karina, mysteriously go into the toilet bowl. Suffice to say, they were spooked upon seeing their costume in there. Courtney believes it was a ghost. I personally, as I wasn't there, don't know what to make of it. Perhaps someone managed to pull a prank for giggles. But this wasn't the only time that a ghost was allegedly spotted. She apparently saw one near the toilets that was once the maths block turned English writing block. Like I said earlier, this school has history, being old and with the graveyard beneath it, so who knows if there are spectres roaming around still. Going through the education system in England is a box of chocolates in terms of what will happen. You never know truly what you will get. Enter yours truly. I'm a female, white, with brown curly hair and blue eyes, standing at about 5'6" and weighing about 120 pounds or 54 kilos. Your average girl, who did try to be a good person in school but was surrounded by lowlives. By all means, I was unattractive. At least back then I was. No one wants a nerdy girl who barely has the right physical qualities society wants. Not that I could care given the Discrimination Act against people with mental disabilities, as I have autism, though no one will notice, as I am perfectly normal in public. At the vomit pile I will call my comprehensive school, where do I begin? Their motto? High expectations. Yet they failed to meet my expectations of them. It was horrifying, as you're about to find out. Aside from the overbearing, unreasonable rules, low-quality uniform, over-vandalized toilets, as well as soulless interior, barely anything happened at this putrid toilet of a school. Occasionally a fight would break out during break, but those lasted a millisecond before the fight police, aka staff on duty, diffused any and all situations. We did have a few good teachers, like my physics teacher, who I will talk about later, as well as some downright horrible ones. Like my former maths teacher, who I hope is dead, but sometimes the nicest of all aren't as pleasant as they portray themselves to be. Enter Christopher. At a glance he seemed like a relatively pleasant guy, 6'4", average build, who wore a dark red jumper and was a brilliant teacher. At least, that's what we saw. He taught 2 subjects, geography and philosophy and ethics. I was one of his students for the latter in Year 9. The topic was introduced to my school in 2017 and went over matters including Dante, the existence of aliens, various religions, if the afterlife exists, and the paranormal. What I forgot to mention earlier is that my school was built on a graveyard. This graveyard is where the smokers would convene together to smoke their lungs away. Some had the balls to do it on school grounds, but were often caught by teachers. Since the school was built on this graveyard, it's widely believed to be haunted, and a good friend of mine, Courtney, had actually seen some ghosts. I hadn't seen any though, and I do believe in them. Anyway, in Year 11, 2019, I was 16. We had a day called Careers Day, in which we went over our potential future careers. While the younger year groups did a sponsored walk, I was 2 months into grieving my first rabbit that had passed away in August 2019, and it didn't help that I had to go to school. So a day away from the annoying younger year group was most appreciated. Christopher was meant to be my tutor for the day, but he didn't show up, and instead, this lady tutored us. Unbeknownst to us, Christopher had been arrested. At the time, his absence didn't seem anything out of the ordinary, and we dismissed it as nothing more than a minor illness, but how wrong we were. Cut to 3 months later, Friday, 17th of January 2020. Sitting down by the fences in the yard, myself and some other observant students noticed teachers leaving the assembly hall, some looking rather distraught. Something was off. I knew it. Something had happened, and it would be a matter of time before the students learned what it was. I went to sit outside my physics classroom, as that was in a quieter area of the science block, and had my last lesson for the day, which was probably the best part of school. Sitting down, I began to wonder, what was going on with the teachers? Had another teacher died? Then I remembered Christopher had been absent for 3 months. Must have been about him. Rumors spread faster than Sonic the Hedgehog amongst the school. It didn't take much detective work for our students to figure out the assembly was about him. Having lost my rabbit 5 months prior, and a teacher having taken her own life before this, I began to stress out, panicking, as I personally thought he was deceased. Someone in my classes suspected that Christopher had depression, while others figured he quit. There were other ideas, plus the idea he could be dead. None of us suspected the truth. While the lesson continued, my autism got the better of me, with the anxiety to know what was going on. The head teacher stonewalled us by disallowing teachers from telling us, and I was unable to prepare myself for what was to be told in the assembly, and unable to plan out an appropriate response. Later on, our teacher left the classroom while the majority of people chatted. I got on quietly with the work when out of the blue he returned, told everyone to get down, before making us leave and walk to the hall. I asked the librarian if this was a repeat of what happened with the previous teacher, and they just gave a straight no. This didn't help. My anxiety was really taking a toll. As we entered the hall, our head teacher Helen began to tell us what was going on. She disclosed that in his private life, Christopher had committed sexual assaults and appeared in court that day, and was remanded in custody and back in jail until further notice. I thought Helen said that he had committed assaults toward people, including children, but she actually said committed assaults involving children. Both crimes are absolutely disgusting. Upon hearing the news, my face was that of a gorgon's, emotions concealed and stoic. I don't know how I could stay stoic while Helen was describing what had happened. We had been fooled and betrayed. A person who had a duty to look after and protect and educate children had been exploiting that privilege. As the assembly drew to a close, our head teacher told us to not speak with news personnel about the matter and to ignore them. That was immediately quite sketchy. People should be able to speak up, especially if they've been victims, because who knows, maybe Christopher did exploit someone in our school specifically. Leaving the hall, I saw 2 of my friends both crying. I gave them a big hug. I called my mum and told her what happened, and took note of how others around me discussed the matter. Most were talking with friends, ordinary stuff. Some were joking around, slanging about, and I heard one boy shouting, "Sirs a nonce," at least twice. I wished that they would end their twisted jokes that the lowlife scum made. That wasn't the case. They continued on with their cheap, twisted jokes. A few days later, during chemistry, one of my friends showed me a news article that Christopher had confessed to 8 assaults, including 2 rapes, and was sentenced to 10 years behind bars on February 3rd. Now for the creepy part. After Christopher had been sentenced, since school had not updated us after he went to court, I looked at the news article regarding what he'd done. According to the news, Christopher had raped a young boy aged 13 to 14, so around year 9, not much younger than me. Using messaging apps like WhatsApp and Kik, he had groomed the boy while messaging another paedophile from a local area near him. Then the boy was raped to the point of developing a phobia of being home alone in case he was tracked down and violated, trapped like a hunted animal. The news mentioned at least 44 pictures and 47 indecent videos of the child, making a total of 91 on his computer. Christopher had no emotion on his face throughout the trial. He blamed the heavy workload for what he did, and I think it was rather selfish of him to say that. I was one of his best students alongside some others who were decent and produced outstanding work. I was the nicest one, but he won't remember, because he was selfish enough to blame his students and colleagues for what he did. Not to mention that his class had officially been screwed over, because having substitutes the rest of the time really does deteriorate your education. But when you think about it, had Christopher not been arrested, what would he have done? Would he have targeted other children? Could he have planned to harm those at school, turning them into his slaves at his mercy? It's horrifying to think about, especially when it hit it so well. I no longer attend that school. It was never pleasant there at all. I used to run a Cub Scout pack years ago, and one weekend we were camping at a Scout Association-run camp. It was about 2 a.m. on the Saturday morning, and I was woken up by one of the boys screaming. It was a really loud, really terrified scream. I crashed out of my tent, and as I ran to where the boys were, a row of domed tents with 4 boys in each, when the screaming stopped. I was looking for a tiger or something dragging a Cub Scout out and devouring him. Not that we get tigers in southeast London, but the screaming had been that terrible. But there was just silence. No other kids had awoken, but I'd been joined by the other 2 leaders, equally worried and mystified. I couldn't believe that the other boys hadn't woken up, or that there wasn't anyone crying, but just silence. We still had the same number of boys in the morning. It didn't happen again, and we never did find out where that voice was coming from. This video has been recorded in front of a live baby audience. You may have heard the breathing. Thank you everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. I loved these stories, a nice mix of like creepy people and paranormal. Always the best. So yes, I do hope that you profoundly enjoyed the work for today. I really enjoyed making it. I was really happy with this video. Sorry for the delay. A certain baby woke up partway through the recording, and I've had to record her in my arms. She's quite a chunky baby, despite being breastfed only. She weighed 5.5 kilos a month after being born. No, 2 weeks. So 2 weeks after being born. You know, it's mad. And this is her 2-month anniversary, 2-month birth anniversary. Can we say that? So yeah, she probably weighs a fair bit more now. Probably about 6 or something. In any case, she's a chonker. And it hurts my back to record while holding her. But it is absolutely necessary, as my wife's back has already snapped from exhaustion. So there you go. We split the pain load, but we love her. She has nothing to say right now. She's just staring at the back wall. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I really, really liked it, like for real. So yes, I'm gonna have, it'd be great if I could finish this off with university, then school, then just like straight up little kid horrors. But sadly, I don't have enough. Let's see, what can we have? Maybe I'll put up a poll to see what we're going to have on Friday. Ooh, big announcement. We have something huge dropping on Friday. I seriously can't wait. Big news about the app. It's finally coming. So, you know, stick around and find out what's going to happen on Friday. Yeah, I'm just so hyped. Just in time for Halloween, right? All information will be shown on Friday. I've already done like the little teaser thing for you guys to see then. Alright then guys, thank you so much for watching, for real. Please leave a comment, because YouTube loves the comments, and so do I. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one, and a huge thanks as always to my lovely members and patrons who I did not forget, whose names are on screen. You guys are amazing, and I love you, and thank you everyone so much for signing up. Okay, that's it for now. I'm actually sweating. Bye!